Alright, so today marks 1 year since the Greenville revamp released, and also in a few days marks 4 years since I started playing GB, which is sort of a long time ago. I don't really know where it went, especially the past year. But anyway, today I'll be telling you everything you need to know to get up to speed on the Greenville revamp. Something many of you probably don't know is that the Greenville revamp goes a lot further back than you may think. In fact, it goes all the way back to the very start of the year 2018 when the revamp was initially announced. So, shortly after Greenville version 3's release, the developers decided they wanted to do yet another revamp. At the time, I don't think anybody thought it would have taken as long as it did, though I think in the end it was worth the wait. Why did it take almost 3 years, you may ask? Well, they went through a lot of different versions before they got to the one we have today. According to Smears, they've gone through 5 scrap maps, 4 scrap sets of backend code, 3 scrap fully functioning user interfaces, and spent months on unfinished map decor, buildings, unused vehicles, and additional user interfaces that weren't fully functional. On top of all that, Hunter started work on many side projects in that time as well. His side projects included this, which I found an old clip of that I recorded all the way back in January 2018. At the time, there wasn't a name for this game, so I suggested it to be World Simulator 2018. Very original, I know. Sunset Valley was another side project of his, as well as Throttle Rush, Appleton 1999, which would have been a game of Appleton set in 1999 with everything period correct, like areas and cars, and there were probably some other games that I'm forgetting as well. Eventually, I guess you just got tired of changing game ideas and leaving many time-consuming projects unfinished that ended up sadly never seeing completion, so we decided to ask what all the Greenville community wanted to see, an entirely new game or a revamp to Greenville. Though not incredibly surprising since it was the Greenville Discord after all, the revamp of Greenville ended up winning the poll. The initial vision of the revamp was to have an entirely new map from pretty much the ground up. This was one of the first ever revamp maps. It had a few cool things like the Starbucks building, a self-serve car wash, which I still think would be pretty nice to have one similar in the current game, a warehouse, sort of in the middle of nowhere, a few houses, and the dealer we all know of today, funny enough. Unfortunately though, not only did they go through a lot of game content itself during revamp development, they also went through a lot of developers/contributors, which ended up causing this map to be scrapped. There were tons of other revamp maps, ones from the ground up, multiple versions of revisions in addition to the existing GB3 map, and eventually the one we have today, which is pretty much a heavily revised version of the GB3 map. New terrain, new buildings, roads, expansions, and more. Speaking of terrain though, let me show you a version of the revamp right before the release, but with one main difference. As you may be able to tell, the terrain is not part terrain like we have now. It's actually smooth terrain, which if you don't know is a different type of terrain that can be more easily sculpted and aims to be a bit more realistic looking. Especially with the grass particles, which is probably why Hunter tried out this type of terrain, as it was a brand new Roblox feature for terrain around the time this version was made. I've seen the comments on other people's videos of this version of the game, and many people seem to like this terrain more than the type we have now. I can see why people might like it better, though I actually prefer the terrain we have currently. It just fits the vibe of the game better in my opinion, especially with the elevation changes, ditches, and other stuff we have now that isn't in this version. I believe that was part of the reasoning for doing the terrain style we have now, but also performance related reasons. While I'm in this version, I might as well quickly mention some unique cars in here that we don't have in the game currently. The R34 Skyline, the Chrysler ME412, which sounds crazy and also is pretty quick. The 1998 Ford F-150 Lightning, also the 1998 Ford Expedition Thunder, which is pretty similar to the Lightning driving/sound wise. a tow truck, a C6Z06 Corvette, Scooby's Garage's Prius, or old Prius I should say. This, which to you may just look like the normal Western Kaiju in the current game, which is super fast, but this is actually a $2.5 million XA version, which is even faster. And the crazy 2077 Tesla Super Cybertruck, pretty much just a normal Cybertruck with a body kit on it, black Wisconsin plates, blue lighting, underglow, and a nostalgic engine sound that I can't remember where it's from. Plus, here's a few other unique things in this version. Cars had different gauges, the default A chassis gauges since the final ones weren't done yet. There was also a boost gauge as well. Some cars had different turn signal sounds. A wiper button and wipers, of course. By pressing V, your car gauges would go away. There were brake squeal sounds and glowing brakes. The Jetta TDI beaters sort of rolled coal. There were die-cast cars in Best Buy, which were super cool. There was a different Toys for Trucks that never made it into any public version of the game. And due to a bit more customizable terrain, some fun ramps. Alright, so anyways, now time to talk about the final stretch to the revamp. The year is 2020, the revamp has been in development for a while now, and there's not really anything out of the ordinary happening with development, or so it seems to the average player. Out of nowhere in early September, actually just a little more than a week before the revamp initially dropped, the Greenville Twitter posted a link to an article discussing the revamp. The article discussed some things like why the revamp was taking so long, and also a confirmed release window of simply before 2021. Some people were even confused by it, since earlier in the year their April Fool's joke was that the revamp was cancelled, and honestly to most people it probably seemed pretty convincing. After waiting years for the revamp, it was pretty exciting knowing that it was coming by the end of the year, and compared to 3 years it really didn't seem like that much longer to wait. Nobody, besides developers of course, knew what was happening within 2 weeks of that article. On the Saturday of September 19th, 2020, everyone was pretty much just minding their own business like normal, or at least I was, and then out of nowhere, Hunter announced that he was premiering a new video on YouTube, that video being titled Greenville Revamp Showcase. At first, I honestly didn't know what to expect. I figured to show the revamp and be a cool little teaser, but I wasn't even expecting a confirmed release date, much less anything more after such a short time from when the article was posted. To To be honest, I didn't really know what to expect at all. Nonetheless though, watching that premiere live was pretty intense. Everything for the past few years had led up to that video. I started off just saying some things that will be coming the revamp that we mostly already knew about, like car trims and new buildings, but at the end of the trailer it just shows this. The Greenville text for a second, then releases on fades into the screen below it. At that moment in time when it was premiering, this part of the trailer felt like slow motion in my head, and to be honest with you, by then I still wasn't even convinced that we would get a confirmed release date. I was more thinking that they would just remind us of the confirmed release window being by the end of the year. After 2 months of staring at the screen, after a few seconds went by, on disappears off the screen, leaving just releases. Then it happens. We see the actual release date fade into the screen, and nobody could seem to believe it. It was later that day, or the next depending on the time zone, and the live chat went insane. A lot of people still thought it was a joke. I think they definitely made the right choice to surprise everyone though, because it sort of took everyone by shock and excitement, including myself. I was really excited, more than I had been for a long time, and even seeing that trailer today makes me excited for some reason. But anyway, I stayed up late that night and woke up early, and finally the day had come. The Greenville revamp, after years of development and myself looking forward to it, was out. On the day of release, the game had way more active players than ever before, highest I saw being over 18,000. And to put that a bit more into perspective, prior to the revamp, I don't think the game ever reached over 10,000 concurrent players, even on the best days. That day, the game even made it toward the very top of the Roblox popular game sort, near huge games like Jailbreak. Not sure if anybody noticed, but I never actually made a video specifically covering the revamp, mainly due to the fact that I just wanted to enjoy it myself and have fun playing it. Even though I had played testing versions of the revamp before it released, in fact one was actually just less than a month before the release, it was still such a big deal and so much more exciting playing the final version of it. I guess just because I knew it was final, all my progress would save, I could play with pretty much anyone, and I could finally do roleplays. Roleplay servers ended up being the first servers I played in the revamp. I somehow didn't even join a single public server in the revamp until a few days after the release. And even after a year, I can still confidently say that this is my favorite version of Greenville. I have a lot of memories in GB2 and 3, but also the revamp now as well, and the game itself now just has a lot more to offer compared to previous versions. The car selection is so much greater than previous versions, especially with trims, which was and is a total game changer. The map feels so much more full and complete. The cars drive so much better and are way more peppy and engaging to drive compared to the previous versions, especially with burnout and launch physics. We now have things like AEB, cars getting dirty and being able to be washed, rim changing, proper convertibles, and a ton more stuff on the way as well, which is another thing. We have much more consistent and content-filled updates now. Previous GB versions never really had an update schedule, at least not for very long. We kinda just got updates whenever, whereas the revamp had scheduled updates for a while, and now that there isn't an update schedule, pretty much every update since then has been huge. Even some of the biggest GB3 updates were on par with the smallest revamp updates. Since most of GB3's lifespan overlapped with revamp development, GB3 didn't get many big updates. Off the top of my head, the only big feature that was added into GB3 was the fuel system. Most everything else added to GB3 was new buildings or cars. Overall, the game just feels much more complete and polished now than all the other versions before it. That was one of the main things I had in mind making the revamp, and part of why it took as long as it did. That's also one of the reasons why the current version of the game is actually not called Greenville V4. It's officially named Greenville V1 because they wanted to drop the beta part of the name, which Greenville had prior to the revamp, as the only reason they called it a beta was because they still wanted to add a bunch of things to the game. Though, since regardless of being a beta or not, most Roblox games still receive content updates continually over time, so calling it a beta wasn't really necessary. Especially since their aim for the revamp was to eliminate smaller bugs and make the experiences as seamless as they could. Thus, the revamp was sort of like a fresh start for Greenville, since, to be fair, most of the game was completely redone. And there you have it. That's the Greenville revamp up to speed. When did you start playing Greenville? After the revamp? Before the revamp? GB2? GB3? Also, how did you find Greenville? I'm actually curious to know. I found it through a YouTube video actually. Anyways, thanks for watching. Happy birthday revamp. Hope you enjoyed. See ya.